Georgia.
He's not over by the cabins, he's amongst the cabins.
Have you ever seen anyone have to play from here?
I've never seen a golfer over here.
It actually looks like he's house hunting. It looks like he's looking at the house to buy it.
Keeps Georgia on my mind.
And Rory McIlroy has to finish off from a couple of feet here. Oh no, he's missed it. This is almost too bad to watch.
And the magic golf of the last 3 days has completely deserted him, and he is an utter picture of dejection.
All of you comes as sweet.
It's one of those things, I'm very disappointed at the minute, and I'm sure I will be for the next few days, but hopefully it'll build a little bit of character in me as well.
Oh, he did just look like he needed a hug at one stage, didn't he? Felt so sorry for him, and then I couldn't watch anymore, I'm afraid. Even behind the sofa wasn't good enough. Rory McIlroy there, living the nightmare as the dream went so badly wrong at the Masters in Augusta. So what was it? Is it in your head that you lose it at that stage, or is it when your game just lets you down? Let's speak to Matthew Saeed, Times sports columnist now. He was Commonwealth Games table tennis champion. He knows what it takes to play sport at the highest level. Also joining in, John Richardson, golf writer and commentator. He managed to get to the top of his game within a year when he really set his mind to it. And Michael Cofield's a sports psychologist who's just returned from working with the Irish cricket team. Matthew, I don't know if you were watching, if you could bear to watch right to the end last night, but is it in his head that it went wrong?
Yes, I think it is. I did watch it. The last 18 holes at Augusta is one of the most compelling sporting fixtures in the calendar for precisely this reason. It is a severe and exacting test of nerve more than anything else, and we've seen dramatic collapses down the years. Greg Norman, most notably in the final 18 holes when Nick Faldo came from behind, and it was a massive question mark hanging over the head of McIlroy. And I think it was pretty clear from the size and scale of the collapse that he lost his mind. And I've written a book about choking because I, as an international table tennis player at the Sydney Olympics, had a similarly horrific collapse. And it's actually something I think that a lot of people can relate to. When you've got a life-defining job interview, that's when you're most likely to fluff your line.
We were trying not to use that word that begins with C and ends in ing because we got such flack the last time that we suggested that might have been what happened. But Michael Caulfield, if you look at what happened with Rory at the weekend, it was just a meltdown. I think one of the papers is referring to it as this morning, and it really was like watching him melt in front of you.
I think there'll be some very emotional language used in the next 24 hours regarding Rory. I've read Matthew's excellent book, by the way, and yes, of course, there was a lot of mental issues there yesterday. But I would avoid words like disaster and horrible words like that, because if he does, or people do, just hang that around him, that tends to become your memory and automatic thinking for the future. He performed beautifully for 3.5 rounds. I mean, he stood in front, walking to the 10th tee, let's not forget that, and got some horrible luck on one of the holes. And we all need a bit of luck. I know Matthew has got to the top of his trade, but I think at times you need that little bit of luck, and he didn't get it with that drive, which ended up in someone's back garden. But it was awful to watch after that. But I think if he talks about it too much and recalls it too much, and words like disaster and choke and gutted and devastated are used non-stop, I think it would hang over him for too long. I think he's young, he's 21, he's got a supreme skill base around him, he's got good people around him, normal people around him, and I think given time, he'll come back from this, because although Matthew says the big interview may be life-defining for mere mortals like me, I think for someone like Rory, he'll get many more chances to compete in the final round of a major championship.
Well, that would be good to think. If you're out there listening, if you were watching last night, if you have a view on this, if you've got some advice for Rory, give me a ring, 08459 555 678. Maybe you've been in a similar situation and found a way to deal with it. I'd love to hear from you, or 81771 on the text. Michael, just to look at the Ireland cricket team. I mean, they had they've had an up and down time. I mean, some enormous highs. days, beating England this time round. They've beaten Pakistan as well, which was fantastic too. And then they come home and find that they're not going to be allowed to play in the World Cup anymore. I mean, that's a bit of a downer for them. How do they deal with that?
I think that's completely out of their control, because I'm afraid that's international sports politics, which is best left to international sports politicians. But speaking about the Irish cricket team, who I think, I was out in India with them, I'm sure they lit up the headlines back home for their exploits in India. But I think what we tend to forget, but the Irish team won't, is that 4 days before playing England, they lost to Bangladesh in Bangladesh in a game they potentially should have won. And I think as a result of what they've been through out in the subcontinent this winter, the Irish cricket team, they will be a stronger and better equipped team to deal with it in the future. They'll be mentally tougher, and I'll throw this in as a theory. I think that mental toughness comes sometimes from going through a lot of horrible experiences to come through them and come back from them. The Irish cricket team have done it. I'm sure Matthew's done it, because reading his excellent book, he came through tough times too. And now Rory's coming through a horrible experience, but I bet you long term he'll be a stronger and wiser man for it. Although at the moment it's a horrible process to go through, and he'll be grieving today. He'll be grieving the loss of a major championship, being the youngest ever Open major winner. But I think he'll come back, because he surrounds himself with good people. He has a supreme talent, and I think that there's no danger long term he'll come through this a stronger and better golfer.
Michael, I must say I thought, sorry, it was Matthew I wanted to go back to. When I heard Rory talking afterwards, I thought that was a very grown-up interview that he gave for a 21-year-old, where he did say, basically, this will toughen me up, you know, it'll be good for me in the long run, although it's hard to see that at the moment. And he did seem to have a pretty good handle on that part of it. But will he be able to move on, or is he going to get to the 10th hole at the next tournament and say to himself, oh, God, this is where it all went wrong the last time?
Yes, well, that is a very real and credible fear, because if you look at those sportsmen and women who have suffered with this phenomenon long term, it often was triggered by an early collapse. Greg Norman, when he was in the Masters, the playoff hole, and Larry Mize chipped in. He then had the same kind of experience when Bob Choi chipped in at the PGA, and he never really fully recovered from that. Jimmy White, a snooker player who got to the very near, within touching distance of the finishing line, and collapsed again and again in the final of the World Snooker Championships. Again, the same kind of phenomenon, and one worries that there will be an indelible scar left with Rory McIlroy. I hope it doesn't happen, but there is a real fear that it will. And exactly as you say, when he gets to that highly pressurised situation once again, he will remember what happened before, and it will inhibit the way he plays his shots in precisely the way that it did yesterday.
I'm going to bring John in a moment, because he has an idea of how to deal with that.
Well, yes. I mean, I think as Michael says, it's extremely important that he tries to avoid all of that kind of choking language. And unfortunately, golfers love that type of choking language. They love to talk about the Greg Norman story. They love to, in a slightly odd way, dwell on that side of things. And what Rory has to very much do is avoid that. He needs to try and speak to those folk who can then help him to work his way through that. And during my golf challenge, I ended up with doing, I had several meltdowns. I mean,
just remind us about it, because there are a few new readers and listeners starting here, but you set yourself a challenge.
I set myself a challenge to try and break a par within the year, and I began, to begin with, I couldn't break 100, and then 363 days later, I managed to, I took 33 strokes off and broke par at Blackwood. And that's in a book called Dream On. And the line Dream On actually came from Sam Torrance, because Sam Torrance had told a friend of mine to tell me to dream on, i.e. it was impossible. And I think that's contained within that, to a certain extent, shows some of the, the way that you can be affected by words from people like that. And at this stage now, Rory is only 21. He is going to get a tremendous amount of advice. And what he needs to do is get advice from the right people who can then give him, a variety of different techniques in an effort to try and erase this memory to an extent from his mind, so that whenever he's at the turn again on the back nine of a major, where those real genius golfers in the past, the Tigers and the Jack Nicklauses and so on, they come into their own. If you watch the way Tiger was playing yesterday, he really came into his own. He thrives in that pressure.
Yes, you could see him almost kind of sucking it in and using it to energise himself, couldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, there are, you know, Tiger was working with sports psychologists and hypnotherapists in his mid-teens when Rory arrived on the game, you know, or on the world stage a few years ago. He was very much dismissing the need for any of that side of things. And unfortunately, you know, we all know that Rory has arguably the best golf swing in the game and arguably the most incredible natural talent that is out there. Now, Matthew and I have discussed this previously. He has also worked extraordinarily hard, but in terms of ball striking, there probably is nobody better on the face of the planet.
It's just the head he needs to get sorted.
The head he needs to get sorted out. He needs to try and get some of those techniques. He needs to try and work on building up, you know, the positive side of what he has managed to do, so that not that he sits there beforehand necessarily and can go through that, but when he's actually standing there at the turn and has maybe had a couple of dodgy holes, that he can then put it back, that he can then dig really deep, you know, and he needs to be trying to speak to those people who have won multiple majors.
And pin one of them down in the plane on his way to Malaysia might be a thought. You were talking about the fact that, you know, that he did lead, and Mary mentioned this too. Joe Cushnan has sent me a tweet saying, "I know that nearly is not good enough for you, but Rory McIlroy for 3 out of 4 days showed he's world class, and he's only 21. 63 holes, as he said himself, he led for." Matthew Sae, I suppose it could work the other way round, couldn't it? We're a Thran bunch here in Northern Ireland, and, you know, if you've made such a, as we might say here, such a hames of something, it maybe makes you all the more determined to get it right the next time.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, and it's an optimistic one. And coming back to what John said, I totally agree with him that practice is the way to achieve excellence in just about anything. That's a really powerful and rigorously examined idea. This idea of trying to perform while under pressure is a rather more treacherous thing. It's translating your excellence into success when it really matters. And I think that Rory McIlroy should take a leaf out of the book of a great British novelist, George Orwell, who talked about the phenomenon of doublethink, which is holding two contradictory ideas simultaneously. It's almost as if McIlroy has to understand in one part of his brain that winning the Open or the Masters is terribly important to him and the thing that he's worked so hard to achieve, but in another part of his brain to pretend that it doesn't matter at all. And that will liberate him to play the kind of shots he wants to play. Steve Davis, the snooker player, said, "It's about playing as if it means nothing when it means everything." And if you can perform that kind of psychological trick, if you can achieve that kind of paradox, then I think you're on the way to being able to play your best golf, or whatever it happens to be, under pressure.
It's interesting you mentioned Steve Davis. I've got a text here. I don't know whether to take it seriously or not, but wait till you hear this. It says, "I had a tenner on him to win at 33-1 and was hoping to use the money to buy petrol for my car. I thought I was quids in when his odds were slashed to 4-5 going into the last day. I'll wrap a 9-iron round his neck if I ever see him, scrawny wee git." It's a charming person. And he says, "I don't think he'll ever win a major because that collapse was spectacular. The Jimmy White of the golfing world." You look at someone like Jimmy White, fantastic talent, and he just doesn't seem to be able to do it.
Yeah, precisely. And the science is actually pretty clear on what is happening at a sort of neurophysiological level. When you become very proficient at something, like driving a car, you can do it without thinking about it. You can, turn the steering wheel, look in the mirror, move the gear stick, whilst thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. And it's the same when you become very good at tennis or golf. You can play the shots without actually thinking about them. And choking happens when the conscious part of the brain tries to seize control over the unconscious, and it sort of interferes with the smooth workings of the unconscious, and that's when the breakdown actually occurs. And we saw it with Jimmy White, who would suddenly twitch on a black off the spot when he was about to win the world title. And it's because he was trying too hard. He was actually thinking about how he was going to strike the ball rather than just striking it.
It's this whole zone thing, isn't it? Michael, I wonder, is that something that you talk about with the Ireland cricketers? And if you're talking about the zone, or if you think you're in the zone, does that mean that you're not in it anymore?
there are days as a performer when everything just comes together in terms of your physical and mental skills. And picking up what Matthew said there about almost double thinking about, and that wonderful Steve Davis quote, pretending that actually it doesn't mean anything, but you know full well it means absolutely everything. I think there's an example in Northern Irish and British sports at the minute, a man I've known for 17 years, luckily, and his name is A.P. McCoy, who went 15 years without winning the Grand National, and he almost gave up thinking he's ever going to win it this time last year when he went on Don't Push It, because he thought, and he is a big dreamer, he lives by the fear of failure, but believe you me, I'm sure he's one of Northern Ireland's most fated sports people, that he's haunted by the fear of failure, and he'd almost given up thinking he'd ever win the Grand National, and he went out to ride Don't Push It last year thinking, here we go again, ride number 15, and what did he go and do? He made history, he won the race. I think A.P. McCoy has mastered many things in his sport, but he's mastered the art of double thinking, as Matthew calls it there, because he does ride almost subconsciously. Everything depends on him winning to fuel his absolute hunger for winning, but actually he can now perform as if it's like driving his motor car almost. I think that if Rory talks about this to the right people, AP could be a good starting point, or a starting point. I know they know each other already. I genuinely believe that if Rory McIlroy approaches us in the right and mature way, which he will, listen to that interview, to give an interview at 21 like that is fairly phenomenal itself. I think he will come back from this, surrounding himself with the right people. And as Matthew says there, the reason he's such a successful golfer at 21 is because he practices very well and he applies himself very well. He may have applied himself better than a young Jimmy White at that stage, who knows? But I think Rory McIlroy keeps doing the right things in the right order. Yes, there'll be a scar from yesterday's events, but long term, I think if he employs the right mental techniques and the right practice, then there is no reason eventually why he will not win a major and become one of the world's, if not the world's number one golfer.
John, maybe that's the answer. Maybe A.P. McCoy is the man that you think could have a chat with Rory that would make all the difference.
Yeah, very much so. That's exactly the type of person he needs to be in contact with. Somebody who can say, look, here's what I did, here's how I stuck at it, and here's how I managed to get through, so that, as I say, when he's at the turn or whatever, he can draw back on those forms of experience. There was a technique that I used called anchoring during my golf challenge, and what that was to try and keep pulling back, a little bit like Pavlov's dogs. You're pulling back the emotion of when you have been successful. And what Rory obviously clearly wasn't capable of doing was pulling back that strong sense of power and emotion that he was a very successful golfer, that he could do it. If he'd managed to pull back into his mind, for example, the way that he blitzed the field at Quail Hollow last year, those are the kinds of emotions, the kinds of tricks that you can play with your brain to change your mindset when everything is starting to melt down. The unfortunate situation is that in an event like the Masters, the emotion is so strong and the pressure is so strong. And at 21, and so we cannot forget that he is only 21. Tiger's the only person that has won a Masters at 21. Even Seve didn't do it until he was 23. So he is very, very young yet. I think what we have to do is, as Matthew says, he needs to avoid getting into that zone where it becomes a pattern like it did with Greg Norman. And one big failure like this is not enough to create that pattern. But he needs to get into a situation now where that pattern doesn't create over several more. And I think the way for that ideally to happen for him is that he goes into plays maybe in the next couple of majors and manages to come from behind, where he can go through there with that swashbuckling style that he has and manage to then, maybe be a few shots behind in the last day and unleash that staggering talent that he has and then win because he's coming from a different angle, and then he becomes a major winner from a different way, and that will be a very, very good thing to erase the fear of that he's created from this. If he's in the next major and he's led by all 3 days again, that's almost a bad thing, because that's the pattern, then the pressure's just ramped up even more.
Well, we'd certainly all look forward to that. There's loads of texts coming in this. You mentioned Seve Ballesteros there. Somebody says, spare a thought for 3 times, Brian in Cookstown, spare a thought for 3 times Master champion Severiano Ballesteros, who isn't even well enough to leave his house. Paddy in Derry says it was hard to watch last night. The only thing I could think of was his mother and father watching that on TV, so far away from him. He's a great lad. Why don't you leave Rory alone? Okay, didn't win, but you don't have to make a meal of it. But, we're just talking about it. Mal says, we Rory, AP, Ulster Rugby, all beaten. I'm beginning to think the GAA are right. We're better just playing among ourselves. Rory will learn from this and be a better player for the experience. He'll say he only lost a game of golf and nobody died, so let's stop making a big fuss and let him move on. His day will come, says Ron. A couple of other texts. Alan in Ard says, for God's sake, wise up. It's only a golf competition. Your man makes it sound like a death in the family. He's done really well with his sport, and good luck to Rory. He'll never need to work again. It's only a game of golf, not the end of the world. And maybe at some stage he will see it as that, but probably not today. Lots of you saying that he'll learn from this and be a better golfer as a result. Thanks to everybody for talking to us about that. Michael Coffey, thanks to you and to Matthew Sayi as well, and to John Richardson.